I posted a video earlier on the week saying I was going to take down this channel because of current political reasons. I'm not going to get into it. Some of the comments there reached me. Essentially, I was winding down the channel and I had encouraged everyone to unsubscribe because I really was intending on leaving. It wasn't one of those, please give me attention and show me you love me kind of thing with a clickbaity title of I'm leaving, and in the end they're just leaving the bathroom to go to the basement kind of thing. In the end, that video did cost me a few subscribers, so a guitar player I am, a marketing genius I am not. Some of the comments that were left reached me in that, music and politics, they're two different worlds, and we really shouldn't mix the two together. I'm not monetized for these videos. I don't make any money. It is what it is, and I knew that going in, right? It's just the way YouTube does things. So anyway, let's cut the crap and I'll continue with these video series because I enjoy doing videos. I enjoy teaching guitar. And what better way to do that than to use suspended chords and major 7 chords and chord variations to create movement in composition. Now I'm going to use the clean channel for most of this video because I find the clean channel just makes it easier to get the notions across without too much noise. But later on in the video, I'll switch to the gain channel and use a couple of examples there. So what do we mean by movement in a composition? So take any note. I'm going to use this D sharp note here. So by just playing this one note, we've established a tonic center. Without any other contents, this D sharp note is our tonic center. And if I play, 3 frets up, we expect to land, so the fact that I'm staying here, we expect to land back onto this D sharp note. And it creates, that's the movement that we're trying to create, is a sense of tension so that we get a resolution once we do land back onto our tonic, or get some kind of resolution once we've exited away from home. So in this case, we're playing a note, we're stepping away from it. The next note after creates a direction that we want to then land back on. And we can even get this sense of movement with any chord progression. So if I take something, for example, in the key of G major, so we'll play a G major, a D, follow that up with an E minor, and then a C, and the whole thing is not complete until we land on our tonic chord, which is that G major. So even a chord progression creates some sense of movement. Now let's start by looking at suspended chords. Hey, when we're talking about suspended chords, or major or minor dominant 7th or dominant 9 or major 7th chords, we are always relating back to the major scale. In the case of our D chord, we're using the D major scale, so rooted on this D note, 2 semitones, 2 semitones, 1 semitone, 2, 2, 2, and back onto a D. Now in the case of a D major chord, we're using the 1 note, the 3 note, and the 5 note of the scale. So this would be a D, an F sharp as the 3 note, so F sharp is our major 3rd, and the 5 note would be this A note here, so D, F sharp, and A. And if we play a suspended 2 chord, we are dropping this F sharp here and we're replacing it with this E note here, so D, E, and A. And that's what creates our sus2 chord. If it's a sus4, we're dropping our 3rd note and we're replacing it with a 4, which in this case is a G note. So D, G, and A makes up our D sus4 chord. Now, why are these chords generally known to create a certain amount of movement? Because they have a dissonance to them. So if we're playing a D, an F sharp, and an A, you'll notice that the spread between the notes is distant. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones here, 5, 6, and 3 more semitones to that note. So there's a good spread between the notes, and that sounds really good. But if we replace the 3, the major 3rd, with the 2nd, we're playing a D note and an E note together. And if we give it a try here on the little strings, I'll place my finger this way. I'm going to play this D note here, and the string right below it is the open E string. And that creates, it's pretty dissonant, right? So a D and an E, it's not the most pleasing thing. So when you're playing, And that dissonance really comes through on a D sus2 chord, and it makes for an unstable chord that we just don't want to spend too much time in that chord. That's why we're always happy to have it resolved. Now the same thing applies with the sus4. So we're replacing our major third with this perfect fourth that's right here. Now in this case we're playing a G note and an A note at the same time. So the distance between a G and an A, very short distance between the two of them, which also creates that same dissonance. I think the most popular form of suspended chords that people are familiar with is the variations that we can do on the D chord. So let's say we play a D major and we lift our finger, we get that suspended 2, and then that sus4 chord just by alternating those fingers. Now what I like to do is examine the note that we are revealing in our suspended chord to kind of dictate what movement we can do. So for instance, in the example of a D chord, we have our tonic note of a D, we have this A note, another D here, and then we have this F sharp here, which is our third. Remember your major scale, this is our third. And by lifting our finger, we are removing our major third and we're revealing that 2 note. So we're going from this F sharp onto an E. Now what can we do in terms of movement? Well, obviously we can go from a D to a D sus2 back onto a D. It is a movement. You've stepped off of your stone to step right back onto it. Now, knowing that we go from an F sharp to an E, we can think about which chords contain an E which plays an important role. Now, for instance, there is obviously the E chord, and if we try that for movement, so from a D to a D sus2, exposing that E, and that leads us well into an E chord. So that's, D with the F sharp, E, into an E like that. But we can also think, well, what other chords feature the E note in an important way? Well, there's also the A chord. Now this open A has an E as its 5th note. So we could try using the D sus2 onto the A, and that leads us well. And the movement that we have is this F sharp onto this E, and the E is right there. And you can do this with essentially any chord. So for instance, if we take this A major chord, the third is right here with this C sharp. Our sus2 would be to go to our B, and then a sus4 would be to go to a G. To go to a D note here. So in this case here, if we're going from this A, C sharp onto a B, well, maybe we can go into a B minor. That's possible. We could also try with a chord that has a B in it in an important fashion. So for instance, the G chord has a B as its 3rd. So what if we do A sus2 into G? It works very well. There's our B chord. It's not as obvious because we're an octave apart from the actual, right? So that's our movement, is from C sharp to B, but we're an octave. We split that up from an octave. There's also another B note if we play a G without putting our finger here on the 3rd fret. So A sus2, and that works as well. So that's an example of movement. Now movement using a sus4 chord works the same way. So in the case of our D chord, we're going from this F sharp note onto a G note. What can we do there? So D sus4 onto a G chord. That's a given. A lot of popular songs that have a D that go to a D sus4 and onto this C add 9, featuring the same G note. And that's a great example of using sus2 and sus4 chords to create a movement within either a chord or a composition. And I really encourage you to examine the chords that you're playing and consider which notes that you're playing. You know, with this C, well, what happens if I remove my finger there? What happens if I remove my finger there? Which notes am I playing, and which notes can I expose if I remove a finger? If I remove... You can get some interesting sounds that way, and it'll also help you learn the notes here in the first position of the chords, and it'll give you some hints as to what kind of movements you can or cannot make. Now, using dominant seventh and major seventh and dominant 9 chords to create movements is just as effective, if not more satisfying. Now, what a dominant seventh is and a major seventh, well, we'll have to look at the major scale for that.
A major chord is made up of the root note, the third, and the fifth of its major scale. Likewise, from a minor chord, we use the root note and we flatten that third. We use the minor third and that fifth note. When we look at major 7 chords, we're adding a 4th note. So we still have the root note, the third note, and the fifth, but we add a 7 in its actual position in the major scale. So that would be a D major 7 is what's depicted here. And if we use the minor version, it would be a D minor major 7. A dominant 7 chord, which is identified as either a D7 or a D minor 7, is adding a flattened 7 note. So that's actually outside of the scale, and it's another 4-note chord.
Now, some really popular examples of using the major 7th and the dominant 7th variations, we know these, right? So, for instance, Dust in the Wind starts with this C major chord, and then if you remove your finger, you expose this major 7th note. So this is a C note, so it's our 1. There's a major 7th right there. And then if we put our finger here on the 3rd fret, exposing this D sharp note, we get a C add 9. So C, C major 7, C add 9, and then back to C. Now, what is a C add 9? We're essentially adding in the 9th note, so it's not a suspended chord. We still have our third note here, but we've added the 9th. And the 9th is essentially the 2, but an octave higher. 9 minus 7 notes in the major scale is 2. So we're essentially doing the same effect as the sus2 chord, and it just begs for a resolution. So Dust in the Wind, the C major 7th, the C add 9, and back to the C. And then from there, what they do is they do the same thing with the A minor, but they use the sus chord. So this is our A minor. Our third is over here on the 1st fret, this C note. That's our third for A minor. If we remove our finger, we're then replacing the third with the 2nd, so it makes it an A sus2. And then with our pinky, we can go place it over here to get an A sus4 chord, and then back on the A minor. So A minor, A sus2, A sus4, back onto A minor. And you can do the same thing with an A major chord. But in this case, Dust in the Wind uses an A minor. So C, and it makes for a really beautiful effect. There's another song, an older 70s song that uses, I think it's called Just When I Needed You Most. It uses these variations on the A chord. So the A chord is an A, an E, another A, and a C sharp with this other E that we have here on the 1st string. So I think the song goes something like this A into this A major 7, and then an A dominant 7, and then it goes to this D, and this D resolves the whole thing really nicely, because so we're taking off from this A major to this A major 7 to this A dominant 7 and onto the D. And why does that resolve so nicely? Let's look at the note that we're actually playing with here and that we're altering. So when we play our A major chord, we're playing this A note here. And then the A major 7th goes to its 7th. So this is the 1 note of the A major scale. This is its 7th. This is its flat 7th. And when we land on the D, we play this note here, which is an F sharp. Now, if we consider these notes, this is an A. This is a A flat or a G sharp, the open G string, and then an F sharp, which is a G flat. So we have a nice chromatic movement of 4 different notes chromatically descending when we play that. And we hear this. Even though the chord appears to go up in tonality, there is a descending movement that is created by that. And that's why these chords just work so well together. Now, I had mentioned I had some examples using the gain channel, and here they are. So one thing I like to do with the gain channel, and just by the way, if you're into playing heavy metal or hard rock or whatnot, you're generally going to be playing, the power chord, which is essentially the 1st, the 5th, and another 1st note out of the major scale of that chord. So it's your forever grateful power chord with root, 5, and a root. And these generally do not have a 3rd, so they're not necessarily major chords, they're not necessarily minor chords. It's just a root and a 5th and another root to add some color. So let's examine this chord and see how we can create movement with that. So I'm going to use the E major scale, so just an E power chord with a C sharp power chord and a B power chord, and then going back to the E. And I'm going to use those 3 notes. So the notes that I'm playing here are an E, this is a B, and this over here is another E. Now, if this is an E, we have to remember that this is our 1. And if we visualize our major scale, if there's a 1, there's a 7th and an A minor 7th right next to it. So listen to the dynamic we can do by simply altering this higher up 1 So by altering this higher 1 onto a 7, so I'm removing this 1 here, this E note, and I'm replacing it with an E flat, which is an F sharp. And that lands us nicely on that C sharp power chord. And why is that? Well, in our E, we create this movement here. So this is our 1, this is an E note, and that is our 7, our major 7th. And then when we land on this C sharp, we're playing this note, so we're playing that descending movement, and I think it sounds really good especially if you play it muted. And that lands us nicely on that C sharp. Now you can do the same thing with the other one. So there's a 1, a 5, and a 1 in our power chord. You can use the other 1 note, the other E note, to do the same kind of movement. So if we're playing this power chord here, just move your finger and you've got the exact same movement of going from the 1 to the major 7th and onto the C sharp note that's right there. So it creates the same movement. Now I like to, if I'm doing it with the low note, I usually place my fingers like this, where I do the power chord with this finger and that finger instead, and I leave this one available for that 7th. So that creates our movement by using a note that is right next to the 1. In this case, it's a dominant 7th or a major 7th. So these are just a couple of examples of using the knowledge that you have of the major scale. And if you don't have it, please look at my video about the major scale. I'll put that right up there. But it just allows you to use some notes that are close to your chords, chord variations, the suspendeds and the dominants and the dominant 9s and whatnot, and just create a voice-led movement with your underlying chord progression, that adds a lot of, I think it adds a lot of depth and a lot of dynamic to the song you're playing, as opposed to just harping on the same chord over and over again and going somewhere else. It just adds that intermediate stepping stone, and that's the movement that we're looking to create. Anyway, so that's it for today. Keep on practicing and take the time to look at the notes that you're playing and understand what it is that you're playing and why you're playing it. And if something sounds really good, try to figure out why it is that it sounds really good. That's been really beneficial for me. Keep on practicing.